Welcome back to the Michigan Football Network, your home for Lions, Wolverines, and Spartans news. Today we will be covering the Lions signings to this point, the Maxx Crosby fallout, the new deals around the league, and other news around the NFL. So let's get right into it. First up, we're going to go ahead and jump right into the Lions free agency because why not? We're a Lions show. That's what we're going to talk about for the most part. So obviously we'll get to more NFL, you know, uh, teams, I guess is the best way to put it, as we get through the show. But first and foremost, the Detroit Lions have been pretty active in the free agency market. Signing Cade Mays, Larry Borum, Isaiah Pacheco, re-signing Malcolm Rodriguez, and then obviously trading David Montgomery. And then they just cut Josh Pascal as well pretty recently. So they're doing some things. They also restructured Jared Goff, cleared up about $40 million in cap space, but it ended up being about 32 actually cleared on the cap, which helps us out a lot. As far as I know, we're sitting, between 15 to $25 million in cap space, depending on exactly what happens with those deals, because some of them are unreported at this point. But with that being said, we already went into the Cade Mays and Larry Borum signings last week's show. So, kind of to sum that up, or last week, it was Monday that we did the last show. Usually we do this every week. So that's just kind of muscle memory on that one.
Yeah.
But with that being said, we already talked about the Cade Mays and Larry Borum signings on Monday's show. So, quick sum up on that. I really like them. I think as long as the Borum signing money is true, I think it was 1 year, 5 million. I'm totally fine
That's
with
what I
that as a
saw
swing
too.
tackle. Yeah, and I feel like at this point, I'm not mad at that at all. He's not a guy you're going to rely on to start, or at least want to rely on to start necessarily, but I do feel like he's a guy that could start for us, and I would feel a lot better about him than, Manu or
Yes.
even Skipper, I would say. Honestly, I think I'd feel better about Borum than I would Skipper. And, I love Skipper a lot, but before he was in Detroit, he, was bouncing around practice squads and things like that. So Borum at least comes here with starts under his belt, and he's still only 26 years old. So I feel pretty good about that. And then obviously Cade Mays, $8.3 million per year over the next 3 years for your starting center, who's only 26. I think, is a beautiful signing, especially considering what we just saw Tyler Linderbaum get, in the freaking open market. And like I said on Monday, I figured it was going to be about 28 million. He got 27, so we were right about that number. So not that surprising to me, and I know a lot of people, were very surprised by it, but that's the going rate at this point, And I feel like especially people are, which is weird because this is football, and you'd think people would understand this for a long time. People are starting to understand that center is one of the most, valuable offensive line
Overrated?
positions.
Oh, my bad.
All right, all right. I'll
No,
let
I
you speak
disagree,
up
but I'm just
yourself.
chiming in from my experience of talking to people on social media. That is a common thing amongst, I will just say, average Joes and Janes. But no, it is massively important.
Yeah, I would say it's probably the second most important offensive position other than quarterback in terms of the type of player you need there. Like, you can sign a tackle because they're an athlete and they're strong and they can block people. A center needs to be able to have the snap. Think about this, guys, okay? It's already hard enough, right, to push someone or to try to block someone with two hands, okay? This guy is the only lineman on either side of the ball that only gets one arm at one time. Think about it that way. Because he has to snap the ball and block at the same time. So he only gets to make impact with one arm at first. Just saying, it's a tough position from that aspect alone, let alone all the mental, gymnastics you have to do throughout the game because you have to call out the blitzes, call out the coverages, call out the pass protections and everything, Mike and everything like that. So it's a very very tough position physically and mentally, and I just feel like that is the most valuable position on the offensive line. Obviously, it might not be in terms of money because of the way the NFL works, but I also personally believe that pressure up the middle is a little bit more valuable than edge pressure. So those are two things that I really, in terms of my football philosophy, believe in, and that's why center comes down to uh, being very valuable to me. And Cade Mays is a great one. I think he is going to be an upgrade over Glasgow right away, but I also think he's got a lot of potential, to grow into a better player. And we talked about it, like I said, more in depth on Monday. But I really, really like him. And if you should go back and watch some of those clips because we really got into the nitty gritty here about why we like those two guys and what they do really well. So that is on our YouTube channel. Obviously, if you're watching, you're probably on YouTube or Twitch. So if you're on YouTube, watch it after the show, and it's a really good segment. So with that being said, moving on to the new signings that we haven't talked about yet. Isaiah Pacheco, the running back from Kansas City, 1 year, $1.8 million. I really like the signing personally. I do think he's going to be pretty good for us. And I also feel he's gotten pretty disrespected, over the last couple of years because he had a pretty gruesome injury where he fractured his fibula and his ankle, which is rough stuff. That is just absolutely gruesome. And then the next year he, sprained his MCL, which I assume has something to do with the knee and ankle or, leg and ankle injury. So that's a tough go of it. Only 27 years old, but, averaged like 3.8 yards per carry over the last two seasons. I really like it. His aggressive physical run style, I think, fits really well next to Jahmyr Gibbs. And actually, I think we've coined a new nickname, Fast and Furious. I personally really like it because obviously Jahmyr Gibbs is fast and Pacheco he runs furiously. He's like Kyle Brandt from the NFL Network. I think he's still on the
Hmm.
NFL Network if I remember correctly. I know these guys are moving around all the time these days, but
That's true.
um, but he was talking about how Pacheco hasn't gotten on angry runs yet, and he's one of his favorites in terms of that segment. So he expects the Lions to. I'm sorry, it looks like we had some connection issues for a second.
We good?
Um, I think we're good. Riverside just said reconnecting. I hope you guys didn't lose us, but it looks like we are good to go. But catching back up on where we were. Point being, I do really like the addition of Pacheco to kind of replace Montgomery. I don't think he's going to, 1-to-1 replace Montgomery, but I do really like it, and it's a super cheap signing. And he's a great pass blocker, so that's a big positive. We didn't really have great pass blocker last year. I love Monty, I love Gibbs, but didn't really get it done at a high level consistently on that level. So
Yeah, per usual, I agree with everything you say. I'm I'm glad you went into the detail of like what the center does besides just block. They call out the coverages, and if you're a fan of the show or if you're new here, I'll quickly restate. I was never really a fan of moving Ratledge over to center because he's never played the center position in a game, so he's never done those extra duties. It's not just, oh, you block 5 foot more to your left. And I really feel like towards the end of the year that he had a very strong campaign to end his rookie season. So, in my opinion, the less people you move around, don't get me wrong, versatility is great, but the less people you move around, the more they can become familiar. A perfect example is Zeitler. No matter what team he's played on, he's only been a right guard. Like, that's his spot, and he does it insanely well. And I know a lot of people are talking about potentially moving Sewell over, and I guess that's a debate point, but I would, especially with this draft coming up, and I don't want to go too far into prospects, but there's several left tackle prospects I feel like could be there at 17, and not just left tackle prospects, but quality left tackle prospects, not just taking one to take one. And so I'll talk about more of that when we talk about the draft. But I really like the fact that we got a veteran center. He's still young. He's only 26, but he's been there, done that. He knows how to play the center position, and that allows other players to do their best at what they do. So not only is it filling our need at center, in my opinion, it stabilizes the guard position as well, at least the right guard. And then when it comes to Pachenko, I absolutely love the signing. I was slightly hesitant when they first came out with it because it just said for a couple hours. that the Lions signed Pachenko and they didn't say any money, any years of contract, anything like that. So I'm like, well, like at the base level, he at least was a starting running back on a Super Bowl team, so he at least has that experience and knows what it takes and all that. And then it came out that it was only 1 year, so I'm like, okay, so even if it is a little bit higher money, then it's 1 year, so it's going to be off the books. And then it came out 1.8 million, and I'm like, that's one third of what Montgomery was getting. So if you're trying to compare him to Montgomery, like one for one, like you said, it's not a fair comparison. Obviously, would take Montgomery, but in terms of bang for your buck, I much rather have Pachenko at this 1.8 million, as you mentioned, which I'm glad you mentioned because I thought I was going to be the only one. He does have a significantly better pass pro, and he is going to be used, in my opinion, not like Montgomery at all, but more like a, I hate to say it, but more like a LeGarrette Blunt or maybe a Jamal Williams, like a third down back and a goal line back. I don't think he is going to be getting many carries at midfield. I think this is really like the Gibbs show and then side feature of Pachenko. And with his injury history, I mean, that takes a lot of the workload off him. So in my opinion, that makes me like it even more because, as you said, he is the kind of the perfect Dan Campbell guy that just tries to run through a wall. I've seen a lot of KC fans say he just runs into the back of his O line all the time, and I'm like, well, if it's 3rd and 1, that's not always the worst thing. Don't get me wrong, I won't say I endorse it exactly to do it all the time, but if you just need that 1 yard, just hit the hole or hit something as hard as you can, and you can push through it. Especially with this upgraded O line with Sewell, Ratledge, and Mays. So in terms of value, I really like it, but I have seen quite a few people uh, not be as fond of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not gonna lie and say that Pacheco has, A plus ball carrier vision or anything like that. Like he's not the greatest back in terms of that. And I said it in the article that I wrote on this earlier today, which you should check out, MichiganFootballNetwork.com. The most recent article we just published is about exactly this. Montgomery is a back that has very good vision, and that's really his, selling point. Obviously, his physicality is very good, but he's not necessarily known for his speed. And I know he's broken a couple long runs, but he's not a speed back at the end of the day. And his thing is really he's able to find holes and get through them. Whereas Pacheco, he kind of struggles at that. So hopefully, our offensive line, like you said, can make those holes and help him out there. But at the same time, I will disagree with one thing that you said just a little bit. I do think Pacheco is going to have a decently sized role here. Now, do I think he's going to get 12 touches a game? Probably not, but I could see 8 to 10 honestly in the pass and the run game every game because think about it, you probably in the NFL, I would say you probably want to run it like 25 times ish per game to 30 maybe depending on what's going on within the game. So if you're thinking Gibbs is probably getting 15 to 18 carries, where are those other 10 going to come from? I think it's going to be Pacheco for the most part. We'll
Off.
see what right. QB sneak, baby. Let's go. No, but honestly, a sidebar, we need our own tush push. I'm not going to say Goff needs the one to run it, but we need something that we can just go out there and get a yard because Dan Campbell loves going for it on 4th and short. So we need something like that. But either
Handoff
way,
to Sewell?
I mean, Laporta takes a
I don't
snap
know
like
anyone that
Tyler
can stop
Warren.
Sewell
Like,
if you only need 1 yard.
exactly. But at the same time, you want him to block for you. So it's like, that's a conundrum.
That's what his other
Um,
arm is for. Like,
True. But with that being said, moving on to the most well, yeah, I think this is more recent than Pacheco, or no, it's not. I'm sorry, Malcolm Rodriguez signed less recently
that's
than
more recent.
Pacheco. It is more recent. Okay,
Yeah.
I thought so, but I was thinking maybe I might have been wrong. But either way, the Lions re-signed Malcolm Rodriguez, which obviously we do not know the exact contract details quite yet. But I do like the re-signing. I wanted it to happen. It does suck. It's only 1 year. I kind of wish we would have signed him for a couple more years, just considering how young he is. Um, but with that being said, I am not going to sit here and say we are done at linebacker just because we re-signed Malcolm Rodriguez. I love Rodrigo, one of my favorite players on the Lions in terms of play style and, just who he is as a person. But at the end of the day, he has, struggles on the field. He has issues with pass coverage. I mean, he's a good run defender, don't get me wrong. Like, he's great on first and second down, especially if you're going like, 4-3. But if we're looking for a guy that can cover out of the 4-3, I mean, I don't know if Rodrigo is really the guy. I'm not going to say he definitely can't do it, but at the same time, I do think we need depth either way. But I do think we need somebody that's a little bit higher level than just a straight up backup who can cover, because he's going to have to fill in for Rodrigo in those situations that, we need that third linebacker on the field who can also cover. And look, Barnes, I love Barnes, but I don't think he's an A plus coverage guy either. So I just think our linebacking core needs a little bit of, needs a little added juice in the coverage. So while I do love the Rodrigo re-signing, I don't think, linebacker is off the table by any means.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I love the Rodrigo signing because, in my opinion, he's a perfect number four linebacker. He's kind of, and I'm not trying to say this as a disservice because I know a lot of people didn't like Scruggs when we got him, but that guy that can kind of fit multiple linebacker positions. He's an ace on special teams, but I don't really see him as just like a down in, down out linebacker. But if we lost him and Anzalone, then we would have a real big hole, in my opinion. So it's nice that we got him back. I guess I can say he's more of a glue guy. But I still have linebacker as a pretty, not the number one need, but it's probably in top four for me.
Yeah, and I definitely hear you there. I would probably say top three or top four too. So we're definitely on the same page with that as well. With that being said, though, moving on to our next segment, we will talk about some guys that are still available that the Lions, might be able to go after. Personally, I think there are some positions we will wait for the draft, but I do think there are some positions that we're going to double dip on. I think, linebacker probably. I do think the Lions will, in like almost 100% draft a linebacker this year. I do not see Brad Holmes leaving this draft without a new linebacker on this team. And I'm not saying like a sixth rounder. I think he's going to take one at
Sonny
least fourth
Styles?
round.
Oh,
I mean, dude, if he's there, yeah, please. I would love that. That would add a whole new level to our defense. And honestly, if he's there at 17, I am running that card in. It's not even a
mhm.
question. I don't even care what team I am, to be honest with you, at that point. But with that being said, I do think we could take one as high as the second round. Call me crazy, but I feel like Brad Holmes, there is a possibility Brad Holmes might ignore the edge position again. And I'm not saying that because I want to spark outrage or I want you to cry yourself to sleep tonight, because that's where I'm at if that happens. Um, but I'm saying that because I just feel like all the vibes are there right now, man. Unless we go sign somebody like Cam Jordan or somebody that's, a veteran option like Joey Bosa, potentially. We don't have anybody at edge right now. We cut Josh Pascal, and that's really all we had opposite Hutch. So, Muhammad's a free agent right now, and
Yeah.
we could be working to bring him back. That is possible, but
Just to
I don't
throw it
know
in
if we'll
there
be
real
able
quick
to.
since you're on the point, literally under contract, the only other defensive end besides Hutch is Hassanine, our sixth round pick from Boise State last year. That's it.
Yep. Exactly. So a guy who was on our practice squad for most of the season last year is right now our starter opposite Hutch. And I only say that because I don't think he's going to completely ignore it. I don't think he'll necessarily wait till the sixth round. But if there's a linebacker that Brad Holmes really, really likes sitting there in the second round, I don't think he would hesitate to pull the trigger if he thinks that's a better player than whatever, edge defender is on the board. He'll take him. I just think that's how Brad Holmes operates. And then obviously, he'll have some work to do in terms of finding an edge, but I also think there's a possibility we could trade for one that, kind of like Zadarius Smith a couple of years ago. But we'll see what happens. But with that being said, um, excuse me, I personally feel like safety is a really big need for us still, probably the biggest at this point. I don't know. I'm kind of torn between safety and corner at this point because I do think
Interesting.
we need a corner really badly. I know we got Rock Sin, and I'm a big fan of Rock Sin, but I just as it sits, I do not feel comfortable with our cornerback room. And I know health is a problem with our safeties, but if they're healthy, we don't need a safety.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely, if they're healthy.
Right, and that's the thing. I think we need one like veteran safety that can play a decent amount of snaps to start the season and not, suck. And then a guy who can be our third safety as the season progresses. And we might draft one as well, which, I wouldn't be surprised about at all. But with that being said, it's a pretty thin market out there right now for the safety position. So there's our favorite guy just got signed by the Commanders, Nick Cross, the safety from the Indianapolis Colts, only 24 years old. He was probably my number one target on the market right now.
Mine
And
too.
they also signed Leo Chenal, one of my favorite linebackers. They also signed defensive tackles Tim Settle, one of my favorite free agent defensive tackles. So they're kind of doing me dirty right now. And
Gonna
also
have a
they stole
commander's flag next week in the background.
right. They also stole Amik Robertson from us. So they are doing their work right now in free agency, and I don't love it. But with that being said, Jabril Peppers is a safety that's out there on the market right now that's pretty intriguing in my opinion. Guy from Michigan. He is 30 years old, but that's kind of what we need. We need an older guy who's going to be cheap. I know that's crazy.
I had
But he
season tickets when he was a Wolverine for Michigan those years. That was when my wife went to school there. So that just pains me to hear. But I mean, I am 34, so I guess the timeline kind of lines up there.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Wow.
But yeah, he's you know he's kind of been up and down in his career. He started not too great on the defensive side of the ball, and then he kind of picked it up as the years went on and really played well when he was in New England, and then was released by them due to cap issues. And then didn't really play that much last year. And I do think he's still got some juice left. Now, again, do I want to rely on him to be a starting safety on a Super Bowl team? Probably not, no. But for the first 8 weeks while Brian Branch is getting ready, I would be fine with that. As long as we draft one in like the fifth round or sixth round, I think we'll be fine with that depth. And also, he has a lot of, returner value. So I think that
Yeah, I was
adds
waiting
to
to
it a
chime in
lot.
on that one. Because to be honest with you, he was a name not on my list for the free agents I want for the Lions. But I guess I'll just say out of ignorance, I didn't realize he was a free agent. Because safety is absolutely a need. As you mentioned, he's a veteran. And with Khalif Raymond now signing with the Bears, I'm like, we definitely need a returner. So he kind of just fills that void. Um, because I know, at least I'll say, in person, he was the most athletic person I think I've ever seen on the football field with my own eyes.
Yeah, and that's a valid take, I would say. And that's partially the reason why I want him. I feel like he could be kind of a Swiss Army knife for us defensively and on special teams. And then another safety that I really like is the reunion of Ife Melifonwu, and I don't really feel like I need to explain that one too much. He's still pretty young. He's familiar with the system. He played pretty well here. And he was originally a third round pick by Brad Holmes, so obviously he likes what he sees. From Iffy. And we did let him walk, but I feel like it was because at the time we didn't really need him. But now we need him and he's on the market. So go get him. And then I also am a big fan of Andre Cisco, safety from the New York Jets. Only 26 years old, should be relatively cheap. And I feel like he's probably the best player that I've mentioned, but he will also be the most expensive. So that's kind of the give and take, obviously, with these things. So I want Andre, but he might be a little bit too pricey for us, and I don't think he's going to get 12 million a year, but he could get 8 or more. So we'll see how that works out. But yeah, that's kind of the safeties that I have. And then for the corner position, since we're kind of those kind of are interchangeable on my list, I also have Roger McCreary. And Rasul Douglas and Darion Kendrick. Now, Roger McCreary is probably my number one on this list, period, just because he should be relatively cheap. And dude, he played pretty well last year when he was able to play. He didn't play a lot necessarily, but he played enough snaps. I think it was like 360 or so like that throughout the season for the Rams. And he had a pretty solid PFF grade. It was like 69 or 70, somewhere in there. So solid corner, but nothing insanely great. But I think he adds that like starter level, play. And then Rasul Douglas is a guy I just like because he's kind of interchangeable between safety and corner. And he's an older guy, but he'll probably be cheap. And then Darion Kendrick is the last one I got here. He's like a underrated one. I think he should be pretty cheap, only 25. 6 foot 190. Which I should mention. Um, excuse me. I should mention that Roger McCreary is 5'11", 190 pounds, and if you know Brad Holmes, baby, that's
That's
exactly what
his
he's looking
prototype.
for. And they used to play for the Rams, and Brad Holmes likes to take players from the Rams, and he also used to work there, as we've talked about for the past 6 years or so. So, with that being said, that's all I got for my defensive backs portion.
Yeah, defensive backs other than Peppers, which is brand new to my list, is uh kind of um to me circled on the list of draft. Probably with our earlier fourth round pick. Besides, like I said, Peppers, and he's relatively new to me. At least knowing he's a free agent. If he Melifonwu was someone I mentioned on Twitter before that, I wouldn't mind because I don't think he'd be too expensive as you mentioned, and he could even play over tight ends and whatnot because he is a bigger body as well. So that's another one that I would not mind at all. Um, but defensive back wise, that's all I would have. I believe personally that um, the Lions are. I hate to say it this way, but it's what I see the average fan say, and that's who I'm trying to appeal to. So I don't quite want to say that the Lions are bargain bin hunting here, but I don't believe we're going out there to get the big names. I don't think Max Crosby is going to come to the Lions all of a sudden. I don't think we were in on like Trey Hendrickson. So out of the guys that I see a realistic chance at, um, other than I have one D end and one tight end on my list, and I think the tight end might be slightly more pricey than I want, but we'll get into that in a little bit about that. But yeah, in terms of defensive backs, that's all I have.
Yeah, and I do understand your take there with waiting till the draft. I just feel like at this point we have so many needs, and I do think penciling in a defensive back would be smart. Just simply because we don't have a lot of depth right now. And I do think that might be a position that we double dip on. I could see us taking a safety in the draft and signing one in free agency and a corner or whatever the case. But we'll see how that works out. In terms of other positions, I also think linebacker is a need, like I've mentioned before on this show already. Dre Greenlaw is available. I don't know if he would necessarily be a fit because I have heard, some questionable things about the off the field issues, which I don't really know too much about, so I won't go into detail. But I will say, on the field, I love the player. He's exactly what we talked about earlier, the opposite of Rodrigo. Good in coverage. He's a solid run defender, though. I do think he would probably start over Rodrigo, but he should be relatively cheap because he did get released recently by the Denver Broncos. And, you know, I'm not saying he's going to cost $2 million, but it should be within our bargain bin hunting range for a veteran linebacker. And then I also have Matt Milano for very similar reasons. I mean, veteran linebacker, he should be even cheaper. He is a little bit older, but that's fine with me. And I think he would start over Rodrigo as well. And then my sneaky, third or fourth option. Excuse me, would be Devin White, the athletic former first round pick. Um, for exactly the same reasons I mentioned with Dre Greenlaw. I think he's like, you know, probably the exact opposite of Rodrigo in a lot of ways. However, I do think Devin White offers a lot of the same stuff that we asked, Jamal Adams to do a couple years ago when we added him from our practice squad. So I do think we could use them in similar ways, and he was like our coverage linebacker. So I think that would make a lot of sense there.
Yeah, I agree, linebacker's a need, but that's another one I'm kind of circling a little bit more in the draft. But at the same time, I also understand that you can't just save every hole for the draft. Um, Greenlaw, like as you mentioned, I like the player, but I've seen, without detail, I've just seen a blanket statement that he has a fair amount of off the field issues, as you mentioned. So I just know that's not kind of the guy that we go to look at. Um, so like I haven't looked into that too much, but I do know he was a very good on the field player. And then also when it comes to linebacker, I don't have a name in mind, but I would also kind of look at the trade market on draft day, just because we have so many mid to late round picks. I know Brad likes to wheel and deal, and I can guarantee you, um, what is it? On March 11th here, I'll guarantee you there's at least three trades he does on draft day, and because he goes all over the place, as we know if you pay attention. I had an article last year that I'll update with the moves from last year. That would be every trade that he's made. And I don't feel like he thinks the rookie class, unless by some act of God that Sonny Styles falls, but I don't see that happening. But unless like one of those top linebackers, as you mentioned, he might even go as high as the second round taking one, falls. I don't think he would settle for like a fourth or fifth round linebacker. I think he might try to package some of those picks and trade for someone who's already established. My personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean that is possible. It just depends on who's available and for what. And I do think I agree with half your point that we should take some of those picks and go get a linebacker. But I think what he'll end up doing is getting some of those picks and trading up in the third round to take a
That works too.
linebacker. Because I think there are some in this draft that you can get around that level that Brad Holmes really likes that we did, invites with throughout the combine and things like that. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And like I said before, I wouldn't be surprised if we draft one higher. Um, but with that being said, my last position really at this point is edge rusher, like we mentioned before. It's kind of a position that's been ignored so far throughout Brad Holmes' tenure as the Lions GM, outside of Aiden Hutchinson. Realistically, like we really haven't done much other than trading a fifth and a sixth round pick for Zarius Smith, which we all loved at the time, but ended up not being a long term option, and he never played opposite Hutch, so not really counting that personally. Um, with that being said, though, there's not a lot left. This is a pretty bare cupboard in terms of the edge free agency class, at least in terms of guys that we could afford that it makes sense for us. Cam Jordan and DJ Wanham are the two that I like. Obviously, Cam Jordan is a name that we've all heard many times in the last few weeks in terms of the Detroit Lions, but oh, we got a trade. Okay,
Is it
what
the
the hell is
Dallas
going
one?
on? Yeah, the Dallas trade. Dallas or the Niners send a third round pick to the Cowboys in exchange for defensive tackle Osa Adigizua, which I actually like that trade a lot for the Niners. They gave up pick 92 in the third round, but have four fourth round picks. So that makes a lot of sense for them, I think. Getting a defensive tackle like Osa. Obviously, he's a little overpaid, $20 million a year, but Niners need some help there. But with that being said, back to our original conversation. Cam Jordan and DJ Wanham. I like DJ Wanham because he's young. He kind of fits what we like, as well as Cam Jordan, but he's just old. That's the kind of the difference between the two. With that being said, I do think we will draft one. At least I hope. Fingers crossed. Obviously, we have a big hole at left tackle now that Taylor Decker is gone officially. But I hope we trade down to 24, 25 and take a tackle then. I don't know if I really love taking a tackle at 17 that's not, one of the top 3 or 4 tackles, and I wouldn't be that surprised if they're not available at 17.
Excuse me. Yeah, I like Cam Jordan a lot. In my opinion, he's exactly what the Lions are looking for. Veteran presence, A plus locker room guy. The exact opposite of Davenport in terms of health. Cam Jordan has not missed a game, despite being 37. He has not missed a game in the last 3 years. He's played every single game, and he's still productive. He had 10 sacks last year. So despite his age, he's durable. He knows, as a veteran, he knows to stay in his gaps and all that. He has gap management, and um, like obviously, as I said, he's 37, so he will not be the long-term answer. But as I kind of mentioned last segment, you can't draft, some 22-year-old young star for 7 holes that we have. So this will allow us to kind of, I hate to say kick the can down the road because we've kind of been doing that with the defensive end position, but it will give us enough, in my opinion, at defensive end that we can take that tackle in the first round, or maybe that linebacker in the second round now that we have at least a starting edge. But it gives us, I'll just say, more roster flexibility. But obviously, it won't be that long-term fix. But if we're trying to win now, which I mean, I think we are, I think
I sure
he's
hope
an A
so.
plus. Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like he's the best option for the win now. And then, since he's the only tight end and only real offensive player I'll throw in here, the only other player that I have kind of circled that I would like is David Njoku, the tight end from Cleveland. Prior to Petzing being the OC for Arizona, he was the tight end coach for the Cleveland Browns. So he's already coached Njoku. He is a solid, just overall tight end. Obviously, slightly better pass catcher than blocker, but he's not terrible at blocking. I don't want to say it's a specialty by any means, but he's not like Eric Ebron in my opinion. Um, Also, with Laporta being kind of up in the air health wise, we don't know exactly where he's at. Least I haven't seen any updates recently on him. And Pensing saying he likes to use 2 and 3 tight end sets. I would like to get a veteran who I don't think he would be that much, but I do think he would be slightly more than like Brock Wright and stuff. I don't think he would be 5 or 6 million, but I think he would be like maybe 8 or 9. And if we can get him for that, I would absolutely love to add him to this offense.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of Njoku as our tight end too. But like you mentioned, he's probably a little bit more expensive, and I do think tight end is going to be one of those positions we look to in the draft, just because I think we like Brock Wright, but we don't love him. And we're going to go in the fifth round and get a guy. I hope Tanner Koziol from Houston. I know I've mentioned him quite a bit on this show, but I think he would be the perfect number two tight end for Detroit. But with that being said, we're going to move on now to our non-Lions segment. Just because, a lot of NFL stuff is going on right now with it being officially free agency today at 4 p.m. I know we've had 2 days of signings, but not real signings. That's how, things like the Anthony or, oh my gosh, the Vikings linebacker. I can't remember his name somehow.
Anthony Barr.
Barr. Yes, I kept thinking Barnes, and I'm like, that ain't right. I know
Nope,
that's
that's
not right.
Lions.
But Anthony Barr, the linebacker from Minnesota, he backed out on a deal a few years ago, and we didn't see anything like that this year. But we saw something completely new that's never happened before. In terms of a trade being taken back due to a failed physical. Obviously, that has happened, but I, and I think this is going to be a good conversation for us here because I feel like we might disagree on this one. But I do, I will say, I should say, that the Raiders and the Ravens are no longer trading Max Crosby. Obviously, the 2 first round picks go back to Baltimore now that he failed his physical. For the Ravens and is now going to be a Raider again. And how awkward would that be if you're Max Crosby and you got to walk back in the Raiders facility and be like, "So, what's going on,
They
guys?"
said he was there today doing rehab.
Yeah. So like he's, I how do I explain this? Let's just back it up a little bit and explain the entire story from the start. Okay, so Baltimore traded 2 first round picks to the Raiders for Max Crosby, the 29-year-old star edge rusher coming off a meniscus tear. Now, the other day, it came out that he failed his physical due to some things we didn't know at the time, and it made it seem like the Ravens kind of just got cold feet and backed out of the trade. And I know a lot of people are saying that right now that that's what happened, and I disagree 100% with that because if that were the case, and I know everybody's like, well, they signed Trey Hendrickson right after, so they must have known that this was going to happen. No, Trey Hendrickson was already going to sign there. That was the whole idea. He said that he was signing there to pair with Max Crosby. That was the whole point for him. Um, and obviously that didn't happen, but I would be on your conspiracy theory train for usually, but I will say the reason I don't think it is that it wasn't just the Ravens doctor that failed him on his physical. It was five different doctors um, independently said that they didn't like what they saw on the MRI. And here's the thing, like everybody knew the injury happened. Yes, that's not the point. The point is he got to the facility, did his physical, and they saw something that they didn't think that they would see, and they really did not like it. That's it. That's pretty much all that happened. And I know a lot of people are wearing their tinfoil hats right now and saying the Ravens, they took it back and blah, 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 because, they wanted Tyler Linderbaum back. That's the thing I keep saying or kept seeing. Obviously, they can't now, but I kept saying, well, now this means that the Raiders are going to have to take back the Linderbaum deal and then the Ravens are going to get him back. And it's like, dude, it's not that deep, I think.
It's not, thankfully, just because they had something like 80 million in cap space, so they can afford all the guys they signed and taking Crosby back. Although I feel like the one thing from both perspectives that's getting lost because I see a lot of, I would say at least current reports, but they change by the minute, say that at least right now Crosby is expected to just play for the Raiders this year.
Yeah, they
But
would say that because they want to get more value for him.
but I'm like the dude requested a trade. Like he
Oh, damn. I think we lost you, James. Um, but with that being said, yeah, it's definitely an odd situation, but it's one of those situations
is
where,
out.
um,
And I
you know,
mean,
oh, no, okay. So it's one of those situations where, it's something unprecedented you definitely don't see very often at all, but or ever. I don't know if I've ever personally seen this happen before, where a big trade like this gets taken back due to a um, you know failed physical. But usually it's just small free agent deals or whatever the case may be. Oh, James, you're back. Good. So either way, I got you on mute here. Sorry. Either way, it's a weird situation, and they signed Trey Hendrickson to a 4-year, $112 million deal. That's 28 million per year. And personally, I would have done that before I traded for Crosby. I know I've said that many times on the show. I just don't love the idea of giving up 2 first-round picks, spending all that money on a 29-year-old elite pass rusher. Yeah, he's elite, but when you have Trey Hendrickson sitting on the free agent market, and obviously Trey Hendrickson is not as good as Max Crosby, but if you're talking about the value lost versus value gained in those two things, obviously the Trey Hendrickson for free, essentially, you just got to pay him the money, is the no brainer, in my opinion. But with that being said, did you have anything to add? I know you got kicked out there, but did you have anything to add before we move on?
no, I agree with you on most of that. Just in terms of it was kind of super weird timing, and I kind of did my show prep prior to the Ravens saying that they were talking to both of them at the same time. Ideally, they were going to pair them together, which I would like to see just as a fan of football, because I really want to see a team with two elite pass rushers, and so many have one, but no one has two, at least both outside. And then the
The
one thing I
Texans.
fair point, fair point with Hunter and Will Anderson. Okay, so one team has two, and if their quarterback wasn't, I'll just say if the quarterback was
LA
anyone
Rams, Jared
else,
Goff. He's
then
basically.
then they would have way more success. But obviously their defense carried them. But I would love to see them on the same defense. But it is what it is. I don't blame the Ravens per se for backing out because I don't know what they saw, and even if I saw what they saw, I wouldn't know what I'm looking at. But as you mentioned, several doctors, everyone knew he just had surgery. Like, people, no one was going to expect him to play now, obviously. But they saw something, and I'm just curious because depending on what that was, and I can only speculate, according to, and I get it's coming from like his agent, so I get it. But he says everything should be where everything is on track for him to be able to play training camp and everything. So I just don't know why, if that is true, which once again I'm just taking what is said at face value, why they would still back out unless, like you mentioned, they potentially just flat out got cold feet, and after they made the trade and slept on it for a night or two, they're like, was that the right decision? But other than that, I don't know why you would really back out of this trade.
Well, I think it's honestly very, very simple at this point. Five different doctors saw the MRI and decided independently on their own that he was going to have long term damage because he played on his partially torn meniscus and it's going to cause issues in the future. And I think that's all it comes down to, in my opinion. It is honestly very cut and dry. But a lot of people on social media are just, it's a freaking witch hunt right now where they're like, oh, the Ravens, they screwed everybody over and blah, 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 blah. Like Tom Pelissero, look, man, I love Tom Pelissero, but he went a little hard on the Ravens and everybody loved it on social media, but it's like, dude, you're just mad because the big story that everybody's been talking about isn't actually going to happen. It's all you care about is you're like, damn, we don't have this Maxx Crosby trade to talk about for the next 3 months. That sucks. You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, you're pissed, but there's really no reason to be mad. And I think it's really not a conspiracy. It's not a big thing. I mean, this Ravens GM was just doing a press conference and he was like, dude, look, I'm pissed that it happened. But he's like, at the end of the day, we had to do the best thing for us, which was we're not going to give up all that for a guy who's 29, coming off a torn meniscus, who might possibly have knee issues going forward. And I even heard rumors that he's had knee issues kind of his whole career. Like it's been kind of an issue with him, where apparently a Raiders coach that used to coach there said basically, yeah, I mean, he would have to take practices like light a lot of the time because of it. He was having knee and ankle issues. So I don't know how true that is actually necessarily, but either way, I wouldn't be that surprised. So I think it's not that big of a deal, and I think it sucks because we're not going to have this big blockbuster trade to talk about. But who knows? He could still get traded. The Bears are a team I've heard a lot in that market, which would suck. But it would make a lot of sense, and I think there's going to be other teams involved in that as well. So at the end of the day, I think people are just, reading into it a little bit too much. But with that being said, we will now move on to our next segment. But before we do that, let's have a little bit of an ad break here. With that being said, do you want to do your own free agency where you can decide to trade Maxx Crosby, or you can be the Lions and trade Jamison Williams if you want? Do whatever you want. It's your freaking world, dude. If you want to do that, if that sounds fun to you, check out sticktothemodel.com with their new Be a GM mode. You can take over any team and build them how you see fit. Link is in the description, and use our code MFN 2026 to save on your first order. So pretty solid website if you ask me. I do think personally they need to tweak their draft rankings just a little bit, but I think that's coming soon, just because with the combine and everything like that, things are always moving. So but it's a lot of fun and you should check it out either way. With that being said, moving on to our next segment, we will cover the biggest free agent signings so far across the NFL. So I have a list here, and I'm just going to go through the top, 15 or so, 20 or so. We'll just kind of stop whenever we feel like it's not worth it anymore. Um, with that being said, though, Malik Willis is number one on this list. I don't know if I would have had him number one, but that's just how these things go. Obviously, he signed with the Dolphins on a
And
3 year,
Orlovsky wrote it.
$67.5 million. I mean, honestly, he might have. This is NFL. Or no, he's ESPN, so he couldn't have, I don't think. But it does seem like an Orlovskian thing to do, which I think we should coin that term, Orlovskian. I like that. When 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 a quarterback does some dumb shit. No. No, I actually like Dan Orlovsky for the most part. I was just that's a joke, folks, for him running out of the back of the end zone. So, with that being said, Malik Willis
I'll
obviously
hear
signed a
about it.
pretty
Don't
big
worry.
deal, right? He'll DM you. He'll be like, "You guys were talking shit." Anyway, Malik Willis signed a pretty big deal with the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, 3 years, 67.5 million is a little bit more than I thought he would get. But that's a pretty solid deal, I think, for the Dolphins to find their new, hopefully, franchise quarterback. Hopefully for them, because if they don't, if this guy doesn't work out, oh my God, dude, could you imagine? You go cut Tua and eat all that money, and then you go sign another guy that sucks and pay him a bunch of money. Like, oh Lord, that GM ain't surviving one more day, if you ask me. Um, but with that being said, Jalen Phillips is the number two here. Signed with the Carolina Panthers. He signed for 4 years, $120 million, which is kind of a lot of money for him, $30 million per year. But they did say he was the top edge rusher on the market, which makes a lot of sense. He got the most money. I This is one I don't love personally. Carolina shelling out a lot of money here for an edge rusher, but with the Eagles last year on that super talented defensive line, he didn't really do as much as you'd like. And he's more of like a finesse pass rusher, not really a great run stopper. So shelling out all that money for that kind of player is, a little bit iffy to me. But we'll see how that works out. And then number three, Tyler Linderbaum here to the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, we already talked about this deal. $27 million per year, 3 years, 81 million. I really, really love this deal personally, and we'll talk about our favorite deals coming up in a second. But Tyler Linderbaum to the Raiders, I think, is awesome considering they're going to have a rookie quarterback next year, who they're taking number one overall. You want to build your offensive line first, and you want a veteran center who's one of the best in the league because, man, I'll tell you what, just Lions fans, you're going to agree with me when I say this. The first week of the season, because I was at that game in Green Bay, the first week of the season, Jared Goff did not look the same. And I felt like a lot of it was due to the new offensive line, but particularly the center. And I also felt like the Lions' offense for the first like 8 weeks just seemed kind of off, and it felt like Goff was just uncomfortable. So getting that, franchise center is a big deal for them. And then to round us off here, Alec Pierce to the back to the Colts. I don't know if I really count that, but a huge deal. 4 years, 114 million. Daniel Jones obviously also re-signed there, so we'll throw that in there too. 2 years, 88 million. So you know,
My opinion, that's the worst free agent contract of all of them so far.
I mean, especially because he gets $50 million in year one, that kind of blew my mind. But considering that's what he wanted, man, I just feel like the Seattle Seahawks GM wakes up every morning and just thinks, man, I did so good with that Sam Darnold contract. $35 million a year for a Super Bowl winning quarterback now. I mean, that's kind of nuts. But then moving on, Trey Hendrickson is one we've already talked about quite a bit. Devin Lloyd, though, is one of my favorites. 3 years, $45 million. The number one off-ball linebacker on the market goes to the Panthers. And then Odafe Owe, which is a player I really like, 4 year, $100 million deal to the Commanders, of course. Who'd have thought the Commanders would sign a player I like? Anyway,
You're
um,
watching. Shout out to them. What's going on, guys?
yeah, what's up, guys? Appreciate you. Give me a job since you like me so much. But with that being said, Kenneth Walker to the Chiefs is another really big deal here. I feel like it's a little overrated, kind of, if you ask me. Obviously, it's great the Chiefs got their running back, but yeah, he had a great Super Bowl run, great year, really, but he's been up and down his whole career. He is 26, but he is 26. You know what I'm saying? He's a running back, and it's like he's 26. Yeah, he's only got like 3 years left, probably of that top tier performance. Which they signed him to a 3 year deal, which was pretty smart on their part. So 3 years, $45 million, 28 guaranteed. I do feel like this makes sense for them, especially considering Jeremiah Love probably isn't going to make it uh, to them anymore. He'll probably end up going to Tennessee. And then at number 10, we have Boye Mafe, which is another player I really liked for the Lions. 3 years, 60 million, 20 million a year to the Bengals. I think that makes a lot of sense as their Trey Hendrickson replacement personally.
Yeah. the jumping back to the Commanders, because I feel like I just have the most to say about them. They literally have to listen to the show because anytime we A, agree on a player, and then B, two other guys that you liked way more than me, all went to the Commanders. And it's not really about, oh, they didn't come to our team. It's literally all went to the Commanders. So that is quite the happenstance, I guess I can say. Nick Cross, in my opinion, leading the way because that's one that we both agreed on. And then when it comes to I would say our biggest disagree point in this, since it is rare that we do disagree, is on Linderbaum. Love the player. I just think it was way too much money. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the second highest paid center is Creed Humphreys in Kansas City, and he's only making 18. So to reset the market from 18 to 27 is quite the leap. And like I said, I like the player. I wanted him here in Detroit, but once I saw that price tag, I'm like, I'm so glad we got Mays. Um, I personally would much rather have Mays at 8 million than Linderbaum at 27. Um, kind of like the Pachenko versus Montgomery. When you factor in the price, um, yeah, I feel like that's quite the difference there. In fact, Mays' entire 3-year contract is worth 25 million. So we got Mays for 3 years for what Linderbaum is making per year. Actually, it was slightly less than Linderbaum is making per year. So while I love the player, as you mentioned, it's important to have a great center when we started the show that way, and especially with a team that has some offensive weapons around it because they do have Brock Bowers, they do have Genty, and they will have a rookie quarterback with their number one pick, assuming they take Mendoza. So like I understand the need, and maybe they had to pay him that much. Maybe other teams are going to give him like 25, and they had to outbid those guys. But just in terms of price point, that one is another contract that overall in totality I'm not very fond of.
Yeah, and I mean, I somewhat get that, but when you think about when Creed Humphrey signed his contract, it does make a little bit more sense because it has been a few years since a center reset the market in 2024. Creed Humphrey in August of 2024, so about halfway through 2024, that's when he signed that deal, and that reset the market. But I do think the next big center, and also he didn't hit free agency, he re-signed. So I think if he hit free agency, he probably gets like 21, 22. But either way, I do get your point, but I do think that it is the going rate at this point, and that is just what it is. But with that being said, to interrupt our segment for now, the Cowboys just made another defensive tackle trade, trading Solomon Thomas to the Titans for a seventh round pick swap. So not a huge trade, but they got rid of some cap and another interior D lineman. Maybe they have something up their sleeve. Um,
I'm assuming
well,
they have to with getting rid of two. Like one, okay, whatever, and one of them was expensive. I did see, although not recent, and like not within the 24 hours because so much has changed. I did see some rumors linking them to Crosby. So maybe they're cleaning up some. I mean, I realize they're getting rid of D tackles and he's an edge, but
mhm.
they did just get Rashawn Gary also. They still have Quentin Williams, so they still have a relatively expensive D line as is. But obviously, they got rid of about approximately 25 million worth of their yearly D line salary. So
And they also
uh,
restructured Clark, so they even clear up more money by doing that. So
they're up
they're
to
doing
something.
something. Yeah, they're doing something over there. I don't know what it is, but they were in on Crosby before, and I know they said we're not going to be getting back in that blah 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 because we got Rashawn Gary, but I don't know, man. Something's fishy.
Yeah, you
Um,
don't free up, especially since it's like I mean, technically day one of free agency, but it's like day three of free agency. So like some of those top guys, or most of the top guys are gone. So at this point in time, I'm not going to pretend like I know the Dallas Cowboy roster. I don't know if they have a guy that's on the cusp, like they're like Gibbs or something that's due to a big extension soon. I know they locked down Lamb and Prescott, so I know at least those guys are good to go. But yeah, they're clearing cap for something.
Yeah, and we'll see what that ends up being. It could happen while we're still on the show because so far they've done two trades while we're on the show. With that being said, though, if you're a fan of one of these teams and you need some apparel, you maybe need a new jersey of these big time players that your team is signing. Check out Fanatics. The link is in the description. They have all of your apparel needs. Um, I mean, even if you're totally disowning your GM for sitting on his hands during free agency and missing your guys' window, I think Fanatics is a great place for you to find your new team's merch because you're going to have to redo the man cave, bro, if that's what's going on. So, with that being said, check the link in the description. It's a really solid place for a lot of sports apparel, and you get it on the cheap. So, can't be mad at that. With that being said, moving on to our final segment of the show, our favorite signings across the NFL. Now, I'm going to kind of just go down the list because I have a few, just because I think a lot of these make a lot of sense and they got them for relatively cheap. Now, number one, Devin Lloyd. We talked about him a little bit already, but this is by far my favorite signing of the free agent class. He got paid, but like he didn't get paid as much as I thought he would. And this is a guy who was like number one in the defensive player of the year last year until like week 12.
Yep.
So think about that. He was head to head with Miles Garrett the entire year. So I love this for Carolina. They get a young stud linebacker who I loved coming out of college and have loved throughout his NFL career. So I think that was an absolute steal, value wise, talent wise, and just fit for the team because he is only 27.
Yeah, I was in the Lloyd camp all season. I was hoping maybe the Lions could get him for like 12. He signed for 15. It's probably obviously out of the Lions' price range a little bit, but I feel like him next to Campbell would really help this defense. As we mentioned earlier in the podcast, linebacker is still a need for us.
Yeah, for sure. And, there are not that many left, unfortunately, for us. But, like we said earlier, we will probably go draft for that. But with that being said, I also am a big fan of the Boye Mafe signing in Cincinnati. Again, young. He might not have the stats the past, year or two that really intrigue you necessarily, but he is one of those guys who. He can kind of do it all, and I really liked him as a fit for the Lions, simply because he's kind of what they look for in an edge opposite Hutch. So we will have to see um, what ends up happening over there. But I really like the value at $20 million per year, and to replace Trey Hendrickson with a player like Boye Mafe, I think is pretty smart. Simply because Trey Hendrickson is getting up there in age, and you end up saving almost $10 million per year. So with that being said, I also really like the signing of Elijah Vera Tucker to the Patriots. Obviously, we talked about him a few times on the show. He signed a what was it? 3-year deal for 42 million, which I think is pretty solid value for a player of his caliber. And the Patriots, they had offensive line issues last year, all the way up to the Super Bowl. So I think this, kind of bolsters a a I don't want to say necessarily a weakness, but it upgrades over what they had last year for sure, and he's one of my favorites on the
It
entire.
sure looked like a weakness in the Super Bowl, but I understand that Seattle just has done that to many O lines, to be fair. So
Yeah, Will Campbell definitely had his lunch money taken from him in that one, unfortunately for him. But he's a rookie, man. I mean, the fact that they got to a Super Bowl and their left tackle's a rookie and their quarterback is 23 years old. I mean, the Patriots.
they're going to be
It's
okay.
not, yeah, it sounds like we're gonna have another couple years here, where they're pretty good. And then last but not least, Leo Chenal was one of my favorite signings as well. For only $8 million, the Commanders got him for an absolute steal. Once again, we are mentioning the Commanders stealing a guy that I really liked. Um, which sucks. And honestly, I think Chenal was one of my top free agents, period, for the Lions because we had a big need at linebacker. And I just think he fits exactly what we're looking for and would have fit great next to Jack Campbell. So that one stings quite a bit.
Was it only 8 million?
Yeah, it was 3 years, 24.
Oh, dang. Okay. Well, they got a steal. I don't know why. Okay, yeah, 3 years, 24. Um, I don't know why I thought he. I must be confusing for someone else. I thought he got 12 a year, and I'm like, that was a little bit more than I was willing to, but because I'm like, that was my Lloyd number. But dang, yeah. Okay, now it makes me a little bit more frustrated. I wasn't as high on him as you were, but once again, as I mentioned, kind of this entire podcast for that price point, he would have been great.
Hmm.
Um, and then, as I mentioned, I only have two guys on my in terms of my favorite signings, and I mentioned them both already, so I'll keep this short. Nick Cross, Commanders. Um, Screw you guys. Like, yeah, I thought he would honestly get closer to 10. I believe it was only 7, if I'm not mistaken. That's something I would give him as the Lions, even with sight unseen with our kind of mystery safety set here. Because even if we did, um, let's just say Branch and Joseph are healthy, we can always put Branch in the nickel and play the slot and have Cross and Kirby kind of do the center field there. And then, as I mentioned, to kind of start the podcast, Pachenko is one of my favorite free agent signings of any team, let alone the Lions, just because of, once again, the price point. Um, Between his pass blocking, because he is a improvement on anything we had last year in the backfield in terms of pass blocking. And if we are to not protect Goff as well as we should, the entire offense falls apart. Um, I hate to drive that narrative because I'm not saying everything has to be perfect because I do like Goff, but any quarterback's better with more protection. Also, like I know he's kind of a power back. Obviously, we've harped on that earlier, but he does, if he can get into an open gap, he does have some. I don't want to say deceptive speed, but speed to him. I believe he ran a 4.4 if I'm not mistaken. And then also just leaning on his leadership and as I mentioned before, I'm like he has what he not just a part of a Super Bowl team. He was a starter. Like obviously Mahomes is the what fed that whole engine and whatnot, but he was there. He wasn't just holding a clipboard on the sidelines or anything. So he can kind of teach, even though he is a younger guy. He can kind of bring a winning veteran mentality, in my opinion, to a locker room that could just always use a little bit more of that.
Yeah, and I really like the Pacheco signing for pass blocking as well, kind of like I talked about earlier. But one thing I saw on Twitter that adds to that point is Jared Goff really is he's a great quarterback against the blitz, sure. But I'm going to tell you guys right now, there's a difference between being blitzed and being pressured, folks. Okay? And I know people love to say, well, everybody said Jared Goff isn't good against the blitz. Look at his against the blitz numbers last season. And it's like, yeah, that was when we had literally the best offensive line in the NFL. The blitz didn't get home. That it didn't matter. All they were doing was taking a defender out of the zone that Goff was going to throw it into. It made it easier for him. Now, if you're talking about getting actual pressure, Goff literally this person said it very well. They said he might literally be the worst quarterback in the NFL when pressured. And that might be valid. And I'm not saying like he's a horrible player, but in terms of when he gets pressured, he really drops off a lot. So having a running back that can kind of step up in that A gap and pick up a blitz and linebacker really does make a big difference for the Lions going into next season. So but with that being said, that is all we have for today's show. Happy free agency frenzy, everybody. It's kind of funny how in tampering on Monday we had so much more to talk about because there was so much more going on. So it's not like those deals were being negotiated before tampering or anything like that. No,
No, no,
that
it's
would never.
It's nothing like how Green Bay signed a contract with Hargraves when he got released from Minnesota 2 minutes after 4 o'clock. So two
Yeah,
minutes after he was cut, he already had the deal worked out.
yeah, weird. Not that's not weird at all. It's easy actually. All they have to do is make a phone call and say this is what we got, and they'll be like, "All right, cool, that works." Like, yeah, it's a business. They would never do anything slimy or sleazy. Who's to say?
Especially with
Um,
a in division rival.
right. But with that being said, that is all we have for today. So once, as always, we appreciate you guys as watching. You can find me at JSoSweet, James at Gullet_James, and both of us at MIFB Network and MichiganFootballNetwork.com. Once again, appreciate you guys for watching, and we will see you next week, Wednesday